Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our only public-facing activity of the Summit of the U.S. Colonialism, and it is one of our interterritorial panels. Those who have been following Right to Democracy know that every month we have been celebrating interterritorial conversations through Zoom with different themes. The first one was on hurricanes and typhoons, things that we share. And we did one on veterans rights. We also did one on philanthropy. And today we are going to speak about governance and transparency in U.S. territories, the importance of a robust civil society. And we're doing this because U.S. territories definitely share significant challenges on local governance and lack of transparency on public administration. The roles of local officials in these challenges are tied to a colonial framework that dictates the relationship with U.S. spending in these territories and the way their governments operate. In this conversation, we will discuss these issues with civil society leaders from Guam, CNMI, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. We want to showcase the challenges faced by the territories and how civil society is continually stepping up and searching for solutions to these problems. And I am accompanied by a fabulous panel, as always. I have Ken Cooper, professor in Guam University. Sorry, wait. I didn't change that. Sorry, there was a last minute change. I have Michael Bevacqua, curator from the Guam Museum, and also a podcaster and just civil society leader in Guam. I have Leila Staffler, government administrator and community organizer from CNMI. I have Isel Maces, a nonprofit director, executive director, and founder of Sembrando Sentido in Puerto Rico. I have Danielu K. Ayono Sataraca, former professor, journalist, radio host, and many other things. From American Samoa, living in Hawaii. And from Virgin Islands, we have Lorelai Monsanto, community activist and entrepreneur. So we're just gonna start, thank you. We are just gonna start with a round of introductions from the panelists. I really just want each of you to introduce yourselves and how do you interact with the themes that we are talking about in this panel. We can start with Isel.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you, Ali, for the opportunity. I'm Isel Maces. I am founder and executive director of Sembrando Sentido, and Sembrando Sentido is a nonprofit organization that works to collectively transform government structures and looking particularly at the equitable and fair use of public funds in Puerto Rico. Sembrando Sentido develops and combines technology, research, and advocacy tools to make government spending understandable. And in doing so, it allows communities to participate more effectively of the decisions that affect them. So that's really what we're about, and we'll talk more about it today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorelai Monsanto, and I hail from the beautiful island of St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I want to thank you for this opportunity that has been presented. My mind has been blown, and I feel the energy here and the love. I am a community activist, and I'm also an entrepreneur. First of all, in community activism, I tend to gear towards younger individuals because they are the future. So I tend to want to listen to them more so and help them to propagate their ideas to move forward. I am one of the advisors to Hadia St. Janko's nonprofit. I spoke to them for years and finally they got themselves engaged and are moving along finally smoothly. but I want everyone to know that everyone in this room is a community activist. Every person you touch, every person you have a conversation with, you spread, let's hope, the right information so that change can come. So I thank you all for this opportunity and for listening to me today. Thank you.
Hafade nan husi Michael Luhan Bavakwa, familian cabezas and bituzugin in Guam. My name is Michael Luhan Bavakwa. I am the curator at the Guam Museum. I'm a former professor from the University of Guam. I am a co-chair for the group Independent Guam, which is probably the largest sort of decolonization group, independence group in Guam. And I also do have a podcast. It's called Fanatsu, which is the Chamorro word meaning stand or rise. And so on that podcast, and Addie and Neil have both been on that podcast before. And if any of you want to be on my podcast, feel free to let me know. I'm always looking for guests because it's Ginini Comunidad Paritauta. It's from the community for the people. And so again, and I have been doing different types of decolonization solidarity work over the years. And so even for me, who's been doing this for a long time, this is an amazing space to be in. And so Sidus Masi.
My name is Tanedo Aono.
It's on.
Is on? Okay.
Just closer. Yeah.
It looks like I haven't worked on microphone for in my life. Actually, she mentioned former lecturer at the university and also college, community college in Hawaii too. And I work in newspaper, radio, and TV, and I'm on those companies too. I actually have the longest running Samoan speaking radio program that covers Samoa and also Hawaii in the US. I started that in 1986 and it's still going today. And I'm not sure whether that's a record in any Polynesian speaking, but that's what they told me. And so my work there in the past almost 40 years is mainly to interview a lot of leaders and cultural community and political leaders of Samoa, both Samoa, American and Western Samoa. And, and also profiling some of our, well-known Samoans around the world. And one of my main reasons why I did that for decades is that because Samoans did not have a good reputation in the U.S. In the 70s and 80s. And I felt that if I profile enough positive images of Samoans on newspaper, TV, and radio, that is the best way to combat racism and institutional discrimination. And, you probably heard, what I've been talking about, during our discussion. But anyway, so I've worked in television productions and all that. I've been lucky in my life to be a credential photographer for the NFL and also the Rugby World Cup, which was some of my trophies, that I carry proudly around. And anyway, that's me.
All right. It's really wonderful to be here, Adi and Neil. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Layla Havea Fleming Staffler. I am from the island of Tinian, from the Northern Mariana Islands. I am currently a government administrator, but prior to that, I was a lawmaker. And prior to that, I was an educator for many, many years. And so I come to everything with an educator's hat. And I just see so much that we've been doing for the last few hours that really will make a lot of difference, especially like when we focus on our youth, because that's where we can see the most change in the efforts that we have. So I'm just very glad to be here. And part of the reason I even got into government was because of what you're talking about with respect to transparency. That was what motivated me to leave education and go into government, which is really ugly sometimes. But I felt like I had to put myself out there because if you don't have leaders who believe in transparency, then you will not have transparency.
Thank you so much. As you see, I have a wonderful, diverse panel, and we're just going to answer 3 simple questions. Not simple at all, but we're going to answer 3 questions. So the first one, and we're going to start from this side to the end. How would you describe the state of governance in your territory? In 5 minutes.
All right. Well, I would say the state of governance in our territory is in transition. We have a new governor, and in that new governor, there's a lot of new policies and changes and actions that would be happening to change the state of our former government, which did not have very much transparency at all. There's a lot of work to be done. And I feel good that I'm on that team to help that leadership and transcend the negative history that we do have with lack of transparency. And there's a lot of work to do, but if there is a will, there is a way. And because leadership that is in place now does support that, I'm there to help support them with that goal.
Can I just follow up with a quick question? Can you also give an example, like if you say there were issues of transparency, can you share with the public what type of examples of an issue? Like, for example, when I was flying here, I remember that in 2019 in Puerto Rico, we had, and Isel will speak more about Puerto Rico, but we had a transparency scandal because they had bought 600 green barrels that you put on the street to when you construct for $3.6 million. So each barrel, the government paid $500 of something that is worth $70 or $80 in the market. So this is an example of things that happen, and then boof, nobody talks about it. It becomes a scandal, but then afterwards, nobody talks about it anymore. So I wanted to share that example. So you could also, when you speak about your territory, share like an example.
A really good example. I mean, you guys have all heard of the ARPA money, right? The ARPA. What was, I didn't remember what it stands for right now. Yes, the American Rescue Plan Act. So every one of us received millions and millions of dollars. And the leadership at the time in our area wasn't transparent about how they were spending the money. And because our finance system, they transitioned from an old antiquated system, the J.D. Edwards system, to a new system, the Munis system. There was information lost, and they turned off the controls that don't allow you to overspend. And basically, we spent all of our ARPA money before the end of 2024. And so now we are in a serious government financial crisis. We have austerity right now. Our government workers are working at 72 hours per pay period. We have our economy is in shambles. And all of that is because of lack of transparency and how our finances were being spent, overspending, spending on things that are really not like $500 for a trash can. We had similar things, we just called it something different. Yeah, so many financial problems are happening right now because of poor decisions that were made and lack of transparency, lack of sharing. I was in the legislature when this was happening, and we actually, oh gosh, sorry, I'm losing my words. We did a big oversight on this. We even, sorry, I'm losing my words. I apologize. In any case, the point. Auditory? What is it called when you, I'm sorry, I feel embarrassed that I'm losing my words. It's the jet lag. Not the audit. What is it like? They did this to Trump twice. What did they, We impeached, thank you.
Indictment.
We impeached our governor. Sorry, I apologize. My brain is, I'm very jet lagged. We impeached our governor, but our Senate, was on his team and they didn't convict him. And so he got away with all these crimes of spending and just irrational stuff that is still ongoing today. We're waiting for the FBI to do something about it, but we're also trying to have our local courts, follow the process. But even that has so many layers and bumps. This is more than 5 minutes now, I feel. But the point is that kind of lack of transparency. We wasted like $500 million, and now our people suffer. And what do we do?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Ken, if you can just talk for 5 minutes about what is the state of governance in American Samoa.
Okay. I'll just start a little bit of background on American Samoa. American Samoa became a U.S. Territory in 1900. And it's a deed of cession. So, and some of you know about, I know two of my distinguished friends over here from Samoa. They know about the automatic citizenship case, but as you know, American Samoans, when they're born in the territory, they don't become citizens like most territories. They only become U.S. nationals. It's the only country in the world where they're citizenless. What that means is they're not citizens of American Samoa, nor citizens of the United States. So they're not a citizen of anything. They're just national. So, and I know, but in 1976, the governor was appointed all that time until 1976. The governor was then elected. The Congress allowed American Samoa to elect their own governor. And then from there, Coleman was the first one, and then Lutali Tawese. Anyway, let me speed up to what recently is very interesting thing also about what we're talking about in terms of governance. American Samoa, about 10 years ago, it was 65,000 people, according to the census. In the recent census in 2020, it was about 45,000 people. And because I'm on the radio every night, I was also part of the census, not part of the U.S. Census, but I was part of the census campaign where all the major Samoan who were leading the U.S. Census all over the U.S. came over to me and I interviewed them. And what's interesting is that, when Trump said that they want to, that he wants to have citizenship question in the census, I noticed a drastic drop in that, not only that, but also in California and Washington of the Samoans. And it was I don't know, I will let you have your own, we all have our own, ideas about that, but I just wanted to let you know what happened. But in a very short, your questions, how would you describe the state of governance? Before I came here, I called about 5 American Samoans who I know them, who have been working in the administration and very, very well-known leaders. And one of them is in Washington, a couple of them in American Samoa, and one of them in California. And what's interesting is that they, other than what I know, they all said that it's getting worse in American Samoa. That's what they say. But I'm not a kind of a pessimistic kind of person. I always think in a positive way. But it's funny what money does change attitudes of how people govern in anywhere. And I've noticed that for a long time, American Samoa do not get enough money to really do a good job, because they just give them a little bit of money. The U.S. gets more out of the stockists than what American Samoa gets. At one point, Stockists and Van Camp was producing about $500 million every year but that goes into other areas that I don't want to drag into because I only have 5 minutes. I think I have 20 seconds left. And my answer to that is that there are always, the problem in American Samoa is because it's a small island. Eventually, you're going to run into your relatives. And those relatives are applying a job for the government. And so nepotism is a big problem there, and so when you have nepotism, incompetence is going to surely a result of it. And that's what's happening. And the other thing too is that a bulk of employment there are old people. They should be staying home and just take their retirement. And yet they're not doing that. It's because there's this old boys network over there that keeps everybody. And so the young people, and I interview all these people too. I'm not just saying, that what I read somewhere. I said, we want to go back, but there's no job there. And I look at it from a far away too. I have a friend, we went to school together. He got his PhD from UC Berkeley. And he did a study on what you call Fita Fita Guard, which is the original Navy military people that were made up of only Samoans. And he noticed that, just because these people, the selection of these people drastically changed how traditional governance in cultural governance changed the whole island. And it was very interesting the way he looked at it. It's like no longer just the chiefs, there's people that comes up from the military are now running American Samoa. I'm not sure whether that's good or bad. I'm not saying anything, but I think there's a certain mentality when you're in the military, and it's very it doesn't lend itself to changes. Yeah. So anyway, my 5 minutes is finished.
Thank you, Ken. Michael Bavacqua.
So in Guam, like many of the territories, but not all the territories, of course, the government system mirrors the United States. And I always think that we should preface our conversations with that because sometimes we talk about what's happening in the colonies and people in the colonies obsess as if the problems are always their fault. But one thing I do want to highlight, of course, is that the American system of government is not necessarily the least corrupt system in the world today. And so, because Guam, for example, after 1950, people in Guam, although being already under the United States for 5 decades, were finally allowed to elect their local leaders for the first time in 1950. But they were not allowed to elect their governor. The governor was appointed for 20 more years until in 1970, the first time a local governor was elected by the people's vote. By 1974, something that many of us are familiar with, the first non-voting delegate from Guam went to the US Congress. And so Guam has 2 political parties. They used to have different names. And then by the 1960s, the political parties realized that if they could basically connect to the Democrats and the Republicans in the states, they might have more influence over things that happen in Washington, D.C. And so there are Democrats and there are Republicans. Democrats and Republicans in Guam don't necessarily completely align with Democrats and Republicans in the states, but increasingly they try to. Some Republicans, for example, in Guam are trying to echo more of sort of the ideology or sort of the activities of their more controversial or sort of Republican elected leaders in the United States. And so there is, of course, the perception that there is lots of corruption on Guam. And this is something that a lot of democracies face, whether there is actually a lot of corruption or not. And so this is a difficult conversation to have, though, because your average person may feel something really strongly, but whether it's true or not is a whole different equation, because the language of everyone's corrupt or this administration is corrupt, sometimes it's real, sometimes it's simply just using antagonistic language. You know, like if you think about all the people who comment on Facebook saying, oh, this is corrupt, but then is what they feel really based in anything or not? And so Guam has had, like other territories, sort of this reputation for being incredibly corrupt. There was a former governor of Guam who committed suicide before he was to be sent to federal prison for corruption. There was another governor who there was multiple trials in which sort of the district attorney, the FBI, tried to take him down. He was never actually convicted of anything ever, although about 24 people around him were convicted of things. And so there has been that history of that. But when you look at Guam and its governance today, it doesn't seem to be sort of, there definitely isn't sort of a lot of the things that went on in the past. For example, like when one administration comes in, then everyone gets fired, and then only the relatives or the friends of the person who comes into power is put into place. You'll find a little bit of that, but I always like to remind people that that's part of the spoil system that you see in democracies, is whoever it may have started a long time ago, somebody like Julius Caesar, but most modern democracies have that. And if you think that that's bad, then you can either focus on the people who get elected and say, oh, you're all corrupt, you're bad, your culture's bad. Or you can try to change the system in which one person doesn't get to select 1,000 people to work for them, but change the system to something else. So that's why, for me, I always think it's important to reframe our conversation so we can find out what is our fault. What is an issue that we have in our islands versus what is part of the system that somebody gave us? And if we find that it's more the system than ourselves, then we should be trying to change the system.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate what you said. I mean, in Puerto Rico, we suffered directly after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. The accusations of corruption in Puerto Rico were the main excuse of the government of the U.S. to limit or to condition or to do many things with disaster aid, for example. And the only people arrested for disaster aid corruption in Puerto Rico was FEMA employees from the U.S. So yes, very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. Lorelai.
Governance in my territory is in crisis. And what I'm hearing echoing coming down the lane here is exactly the same thing, the same story, all are telling the same story. So we have a problem. All of us have a problem because we're saying the exact same thing. So what do we do to change this? Because we all know we're in crisis. And we reach out to entities such as the FBI. We reach out to other individuals to say, Congress, Interior, and you write to them and you say, listen, there's a problem here. When is the last time, for example, I myself wrote to Interior and I said, I would like to know, when is the last time an audit was done on the Virgin Islands? And I was told, oh, well, they're late, like 3 to 4 years. I said, they're late, 3 to 4 years? How do you justify that and continue to send financing? So we, the people sitting at this panel and in this group today, I think we all have gotten a challenge. And the challenge is we can't keep emulating the same story anymore. I agree with my brethren sitting right here. We all are getting older. I myself, my fuse is about this much in reference to what is happening in my territory because I love where I'm from. I want my younger people to have all the rights and privileges that should be awarded to them. But I want a government that cares for its people, that protects its people, that stands up for its people. The worst example of being disenfranchised with my government right now is that my government took it upon themselves to trade the people's land for federal land to put a school to educate children. Why in the world did my governor feel that was okay when we petitioned and we screamed and told him this is not okay? On the island on which I reside, the federal government owns more than 3/4 of the island, more than 70%, and they still want more. It's unjust. So we're saying the same things, and we have. I'm sorry, I get emotional with that because it's a peeve. When do we make the change to tell them enough is enough, and we can't keep tipping through the tulips? We got to join together and said, no, this can't. Because this governor that I am under right now, he even told the younger individuals, you all pack up and move to Atlanta. And I was like, you did not just say that. So yes, the Virgin Islands is in crisis, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Isel.
I'll be short. I'll try. Why wouldn't our governance be in crisis? I mean, colonial structures aren't meant to create robust and representative governance structures. They're there to extract, which goes back to what we call today corruption, right? It's taking away from public goods for private interest. Our colonial structures magnifies that, right? And that's why there's, quite frankly, more corruption in territories than in some other places. That's not to say that there aren't other places in the US that are likely more corrupt than some of our US territories. But it's definitely creating a structure that permits, allows, promotes, and provokes and protects extraction. And so if you look at Puerto Rico is the longest colony in history, right? So long extraction, many mechanisms, some more modern, some more traditional. But today, Puerto Rico is the only non-economic hub. Many of you learned today that we are, under this bankruptcy process, the biggest in the US history. And we are not an economic hub, but we are a high intensity financial crime area, the only one in the US. We are among the jurisdictions with the highest number of corruption convictions at the federal level. Our transparency legal framework sits at the bottom third of legal frameworks in the world. And these are like 2019 laws. They're fairly new and they sit next to China. So what are we talking about? We are talking about systems that were created in all effect and purposes for extraction. And so what this means is that only the powerful elite, the big contractors, the congressional lobbies are the ones that get access to governments. And the policies that are oftentimes implemented represent those interests and those interests alone. How does that translate into practice for Puerto Rico? We don't have capacity within government, not only to execute projects or to plan, but also to regulate those who we delegate our jobs to. We don't have auditing capacity. The Office of the Controller has lost over 150 employees in the last 10 years, and they're still trying to recruit unsuccessfully. So it takes them 4, 6, 8 years to audit anything. By the time that they get to these documents, if they get to the documents, it's no longer, the money has been lost. the process is not viable. So impunity also persists as well. Transparency. There has been hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the last 8 years in technology for transparency portals. In contracting alone, you have over 56 portals that share some information on contracting spending, which by the way is over 50% of the government spending. So it's the main transaction that the government undertakes. 56 government portals that are all decentralized, that don't actually share complete information, that have extremely bad quality. At the end of the day, you can't, well, we have been able to, but it's been a true challenge to connect the dots and be able to visualize the bigger picture of what's happening. And so the stage is meant to steal away from our people, and it's meant to create and sustain and protect the systems that enable that as well. So that is the state, and I'm not surprised, sadly, that that is the state for, for all of us as well.
Thank you, Isel. I have to say, I really admire the work that Isel does. I always repeat it. I think she's one of the most brilliant people that I know in Puerto Rico, and the work that Sembrando Sentido has done. And maybe sometime we can share with our friends here, creating that portal, transparency portal that you created, connecting all those databases that you could connect is very awesome. So we might schedule like a showing so that they can see that work that you have done. But to close the discussion, because I think we've all already talked about the main challenges, I want you to talk about actions, and we can start with you, Isel. Actions that need to be taken to improve governance. I mean, if you want to mention another challenge, but I want to go to the actions that we need to take.
I'll go into the actions. Let's end positive. So if you sit in colonial structures, right, I don't think we should expect the government to be the one that changes the system. I think we have to be aware that civil society is the one that has to reclaim its power to ensure that government at every level represents them, and only and mostly them. To do that, we've done several things, and some of them have worked better than others. And we have also collaborated with many other organizations that do similar things. The first is working on transparency. We need to understand where we're at, right? It's very hard to mobilize effectively if we don't concretely have the evidence to back up our advocacy strategies and to fuel them strategically in a way that it actually gets to where we want to be. And so that is precisely why we started by opening information. And that includes, increasing transparency in the case of contracting by over 350% in less than 2 years, connecting these data sets that were impossible to connect, right? Nothing is impossible. And then setting up preventive mechanisms of anti-corruption, right, or to prevent corruption from taking place. These are things that have worked in other places, that are already working in Puerto Rico, and that have led to, billions of dollars of collusion cases that are now being investigated thanks to 3 out of 90 red flags that we've been able to implement in the databases. So the beauty of this is not that we're able to do this, but it's that we're able to showcase that this is completely possible and that we don't need hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. We need actual intentions and willingness and commitment. We constantly advocate for, again, the end of impunity and actual accountability beyond preventive mechanisms, right? So we've been in this eternal battle for robusting our governments, especially our intelligence and our prosecutor and our investigative and our audit agencies, to ensure that, number one, they're independent, right? Which none of them are at present. The governor is the person that chooses who leads these institutions. By definition, it's not independent. And secondly, by resourcing them. but also demanding more out of them. We can't continue to implement the same mechanisms that were, implemented or used like 20 years ago. We won't be able to innovate and to identify the nuances within large scale corruption that is also combined with organized crime and many other crimes as well that are taking place in our territories. So beyond that, understanding the system that we live in, right? So that we can actually deconstruct and build a new one. That is critical, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, but it's what makes us now have the evidence to showcase what we have to focus on and how to do it. And using all of this information to help communities be on the same, page, and to help work in overseeing every single spending that community cares about, because that, again, we need civil society on board, mobilizing, asking for this, and ensuring that the government is doing what they need to get done. So at the end of the day, all of this is about sharing the knowledge and having equal knowledge so that we can have equal power in decision making.
As you see, she provided a blueprint that should be funded. I think you do say that it doesn't require millions of dollars, because there are people that will charge that to do what you guys in Sembrando Sentido have been able to do with very little. But you do need funding, and I think it's important for us to get that message out that this type of work does need support and resources to be done. So Lorelai,
Yes.
can you share what actions need to be taken from
said-
your perspective?
She said in her last statement, for me, it's to empower our people. We currently, in the Virgin Islands, we consist of basically 4 islands. And in the first time in our history, I like to report that all 4 islands are communicating together. We meet on Mondays via Zoom, and we have conversations. And then we're trying to bring back our brain drain. But we're not bringing them back to work in the government. We want them to become entrepreneurs. So we're trying to change a spin of, you can come back home, but you can live your dream, create your dream of what you want to do. So instead of saying, come back and get a government job, that was something that our parents was told to do. And we're trying to change that. So it's to empower the populace so that the young people can have a chance and of wanting to come back by saying, okay, I don't have to have a government job. I can work for myself. I can charter my own direction and make my home the place I want it to be and enjoy it. Thank you.
That is great. And from Guam?
Yes, so I don't know if it's true in other territories, but in Guam, there has always been this criticism that the culture will conflict with democracy. So for example, people say, oh yeah, you'll always give jobs to your relatives, or you'll always vote for whoever is your relative. So in fact, in Guam, you weren't allowed to have juries for a very long time because the idea was that you would never convict your relative. So a jury couldn't be impartial. And so this is, for me, this is part of the problem of how this discussion evolves sometimes, is that it assumes, first of all, that the native in the question is stupid, that you would give jobs to people who can't do them simply because you're connected to them. And, or that you would simply vote for people, or that voting for somebody because you're related to them is worse than voting for somebody because they just look nice, or because they say one thing that you like, or because you've seen an ad for them. And a lot of these things come from just having really superficial understandings of what it takes to have a democracy, what makes a democracy democratic. And so for me, when I look at democracies in the world today, I see that a lot of them are in crisis because of the lack of connection that people have. Because democracy is supposed to be a system in which everyone has a little bit of power or a lot of power, depending on your type of democracy. And so you all participate to some extent. But what we see is actually that people get completely disconnected from power, whether because powerful people disenfranchise them, push them away, or because they realize that their role in democracy, that actually their perceptions of it actually cause them to remove themselves from the equation. That this is what we see, for example, when people just say, oh, it's all corrupt, or oh, it's all this or it's all that, forgetting that, well, you have some role in this. Maybe you should have a larger role, but part of it is that you have to engage. Instead of just talking about it, democracy is that you can do something about it. And increasingly, democracy is amplified by social media. Just people feel like whatever I say or feel is my participation, when it should be so much more. So in terms of everything from corruption to democratic revitalization, at least coming from my island, one of the things that I find problematic is democracy and indigenous cultures can absolutely go together. In fact, most indigenous cultures, not all, had some form of democracy in them. But the problem, though, is that your culture has to find a way to work with democracy. It has to find a way to work with the government and the politics of today. And so, when I look at things here in the States, and I see Democrats and Republicans, and they're in completely different universes. And Republicans in particular sort of don't want to buy into the same democracy as Democrats, it seems at times. It's it makes me wonder, it's well, no wonder things are in crisis in the territories in our democracies. We've learned our colonial lessons pretty well, because the modern democracy is all about alienation of people, whether for the interests of the powerful who prefer that you don't interfere in them making the decisions, right? So what I think our communities need actually is community. Because when we think back to sort of the small island style of life, you may have disagreements, but you all have to recognize that you're part of the same community in some way. And earlier when we did sort of the exercises from different islands, the CNMI group brought out Inafamaulik, that is a cultural value for the Chamorro people. And Inafamaulik means interdependence, making things good for each other. And part of it is that idea that, well, I could be really selfish today, but I know that if I'm generous today, you will be generous and help me tomorrow. So I'm going to sacrifice today, and in exchange, you're going to help me in the future. And democracies need that. What is this idea that you should vote for people because they don't have any connection to you, or that if you vote for people who you're connected to, it's corrupt or it's wrong? It doesn't make any sense. So, because if you have a democracy in which the leaders are connected to the community, it is not a way of excusing or absolving corruption. It's actually a way of increasing transparency. And it creates a whole new indigenous and local way, as opposed to simply calling in the feds, which is what simply happens, which is what usually happens, is people feel, oh, we suck. The feds need to come in and save us. Instead, by strengthening community and strengthening our role in our own democracies and owning it, that's for me our path. And so, I'm in Guam, for example, I'm sort of done with sort of the idea that this is, that we should blame ourselves for problems in the system itself. It's one of the reasons why I feel strongly for independence for Guam, is that I would love if we sort of just threw out the democracy we have now, threw out the government that we have now, and then, as you were saying so eloquently, systems that are colonial are meant to be extractive on behalf of somebody who does not live there, who is somewhere else in the world. And so why would we think then that the system of government that is put in would somehow not be in that mode? So anyways, but that is why for me, taking a look at the systems themselves, stop blaming ourselves and stop blaming our culture, because these are simply not the biggest problems in the conversation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Iono.
I will be remiss, this is on, I'll be remiss if I don't mention the Honorable Andrew Samoa and former representative of American Samoa legislature. He's still in the phone?
Oh, I got beaten, which I thank God that.
Yeah. And the reason I mentioned this, it's because I've had a conversation with several Samoans, and you know the name that always comes up to be the next governor, it's Andrew Samoa. Yeah.
Well, the right last name already.
Yeah. So, and that's why I mean I just wanted to mention that you know, just to kind of give a short. I don't know about the other territories, but American Samoa, you know, the governor is under the Secretary of Interior. So whatever these guys underneath here do, if the guy here, Secretary of Interior, does not like what they do, then that's it. It doesn't even get to the State Department or the Prime Minister or the President of the United States. I mean, that's kind of give you an idea. So they're trying to, you know, for a long time, Andra, trying to balance this, you know, power, you know, between the legislature and the governor and his veto, and what to do with Samoan culture in reference to the guy that look after parks and recreation, you know, of the United States, you know, Secretary of Interior, and all this stuff. So it's a very interesting, you know, kind of dynamics. Anyway, and the other thing too about governance, you mentioned something about, you know, how do you, you know, need to take to improve governance. The number one thing that I see, the way I look at it, is that American Samoa needs to improve the quality of journalism and improve the education of media people. And because, as you know, in America, that's how we check corruption. You know, it's very simple. You know, we can say everything else, but it's really, if you have a powerful media, and they do not have that in American Samoa. And in fact, some of my friends who are now top journalists in American Samoa, they're actually from Western Samoa. Andra, Monica Miller. So the thing about it is that when it comes to very critical political questions about the you know, who's stealing the money, who's taking this, these guys from Western Samoa don't want to touch those areas, which is so critical in checking of all this, because they say, well, you know, if we do that, they're trying to kick us out, and that's, you know, which is not a good thing, you know. So that's why I've always advocate for more American Samoan to be trained as journalists, you know, because that's where I see, you know, transparency come in, because, you know, transparency does not come in by itself. You know, people like in the media, you know, do that. And so, and one other thing too is very interesting in dynamics in American Samoa. I've noticed that when a governor loses, they just leave the island and go and live in Arizona or Washington or California. It's a very interesting dynamic culturally, because it seems to me that they don't have loyalty to American Samoa. You know, in Western Samoa, if you lose Prime Minister, you have nowhere to go. You got to make it work here. You know, but when somebody just leave the island and said, you know, bye, I don't care what's happening here, they don't stay to fix the problem. So these things happening all the time. Anyway, there are about 7,000 people who work for the American Samoan government, and that's about 1/3 of the employment force in the entire island in American Samoa. So now you can see the governor and its administration is very powerful. And, it's I don't know how to say it, more clearly about governance and transparency, but the way I see it is to have a very strong media journalist, an investigative journalist there to take on, and that person should be an indigenous American Samoan, because these guys from Western Samoa, they're afraid to do that because, they said, well, we don't want to, go look for those things because the government is so powerful, they'll find a way to kick us out. So that's one of the problems. So I'm just saying there's a lot of other ways to do it, but if they need transparency, the media in American Samoa needs to be improved. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I echo a lot of the things that I'm hearing, and you talked about brain drain, and it made me think. I have this theory on brain drain that the more brain drain, the more corruption. I'd like to test that theory. But as far as how we can improve it, I've heard of other systems that have worked, like in New Zealand. Performance-based budgeting is something I'm very interested in, and if I ever had a chance, I would look at trying to pursue that in government. I see, yes, the media has a key role to play. And so having a media that is independent is so critical. And that is harder for our small places because when you're related to a lot of people, you might not want to write bad stories, but the stories do need to be told in order to have that transparency. And finally, I see that, increased community participation is so critical to also develop leaders that will be transparent, because like, if you always see the same thing, you don't know what could be different. And in giving our youth the empowerment to see that there can be leadership that isn't corrupt is something to aspire to. And I know that's the only reason I truly ran for government, because I wanted to have an option or give people an option that maybe they would consider. And it's not true that people vote for you for your family, because I didn't win for that part. But just the fact that afterwards, having so many people approach and say, please don't stop, please don't give up, please continue your fight, because there are so many people out there that do see that leadership and want that success for that person, because they believe that they will be transparent. And so let's keep working hard, guys.
Thank you so much, Leila. It made me laugh because many people have asked me to run for some position in Puerto Rico. And the first thing I tell them, my grandma would not vote for me because I would not run for the party that she has been accustomed to vote for since she is little, because in Puerto Rico is very about indoctrination on parties. So she wouldn't vote for me. And that's what makes it so toxic, right? So I think we have done a wonderful job in proving to the public how empowering civil society is crucial in order to improve governance and transparency in the territories. We've heard from you that we don't have to reinvent the wheel necessarily. There are models that have worked, and there is amazing work already taking place between us that we can share and that we can build on. Another thing that I think is very important is how do we engage then in these models, community participation, but the young people need to be involved in these efforts, and revising the discourses. Democracy and indigenous culture, I think it's key. I've been teaching the class of human rights this semester and trying to explain how our models respond to Western theories that really have based their existence in a reality that is very different from our cultures and our reality, and that we have to stop following the propaganda that democracy looks like X or Y. And having students actually say, well, is US a democracy, and questioning it from the standpoint of their point of view is a very interesting exercise, because then we can open up what would work for us, really what would work for each of our cultures. So I think it's very important trying to balance powers, how you balance powers in our cultural settings where we have different ways of interaction socially. And definitely improving the quality of civil society, such as the media, journalists, as key for a key for transparency in our territories. So I think the discussion has been very rich. I thank everybody in the panel for sharing this with us. We will be transmitting this on a later date, so it's not going to be a live. And we're not going to take questions from the public because we are out of time. This panel had to be a little shorter than the ones that we do virtually, but please connect with us through social media so you can learn and know when our next panels are going to be, and know how you can get involved in the work that we're doing from Right to Democracy and all the wonderful organizations that we showcase when we do these conversations. So thank you so much and good night.
Thank you.